Well, can you believe it? I'm actually on my second upload within a month. So I might be sticking to my promise of regular content on this channel. So thank you guys so much for watching my videos, subscribing, and I'm actually close to hitting 20,000 subscribers on the channel, so thank you very much. So I have always had a massive interest in Greek mythology, and Medusa has always been one of my favourite characters, and I've been looking for the right time to draw her. I've got a couple of days free now, and I guess this is the perfect chance for me to get it done. I'm going to be doing something in the style of my usual Dark Nature series. If you're not familiar with how those look, and why aren't you? I'll have a few just scrolling across here now. And if you notice, a lot of the backgrounds are very negative space, it's stained paper, and they have quite a minimalist look to them. There's very little background going on, and they're more character based. I really enjoy doing these type of pieces, and they're good fun for me to do in between client commissions and the large, more time-consuming paintings. So what I'll show you first is the concept sketch. Then I've got to head into WH Smith to pick up a sheet of white cartridge paper to do the image on. I don't want to be working on canvas, otherwise I'll overcomplicate things and it'll become a big time-consuming painting, and I want to get this video up ASAP before Christmas and get some prints in my store of said piece. So while I walk to WH Smith, I'll give you guys a quick tour of the lovely city of Wells I live in, which is located in Somerset. Honestly, it's so nice having this sort of setting on your doorstep. I literally live just over there, so anytime I fancy some Middle-earth style inspiration, I trek down here, have a coffee in Bishop's Palace. It's all very nice and quaint. Look at that. I often wonder what it must be like for Americans when they come over and visit places like this in the UK. They must think we live in some sort of Harry Potter set. I like to think of it more that I live in Middle-earth. Perfect ending. Okay, hopefully WH Smith will have some paper that I can use. Let's have a quick look-see. Wells is the smallest city in England, so paper choices are kind of limited. Alright, so we've got some white cartridge paper here, which is A2 in size and about between 200 and 250 GSM. This will do the job. Look at this. It's baby Pandy. Aww. And a little cushion. Alright, so we're back in the studio. I'm just going to quickly show you what I've got here. If I can get this into position. Okay. Let's all back to front. I'm going to flip the camera. So when I like to start a project, or I get an idea in my mind, I do a very, very rough sketch like this. I mean, this is so rough that you can barely even tell it's Medusa. But I had in my mind to have it from a side view. Have some robes sort of flowing, and kind of go for something quite stylistic in its composition. And I did this a while back, and it was just like in a pile with my other sketches. And then the other day I decided just to flesh out the idea a little bit more. Obviously this is still incredibly rough, but I want to get the composition set in my mind before I start drawing this thing properly. So as you can see here, I've just elaborated a bit more, so we'll have an ornate type of bodice or bustier. I like the idea of some flowing robes coming down, maybe even some hair. I know Medusa's hair is supposed to be all snakes, but I quite like the idea of some normal hair hanging down and sort of maybe interweaving with the snakes. I'm not too sure yet. I'll have a hand coming out this way and her wings going up this way, so there's a kind of swooping motion to the image. I'm a full-time artist, so doing concept sketches is part of the territory. When I get my initial idea, I like to scribble it down a la this. And at the most, I only really want to be spending my time to do something rough like this. But often with clients, you have to give a very strong indication of where you're going with the design, which is totally understandable. But you know, I could easily spend a day doing a polished concept sketch for a client, and that's a day I kind of feel is lost, which I could be spending on the end piece. And I often find that a piece will develop loads as I'm doing it. And obviously you can't always show that in an initial concept sketch. But concept sketches are all part of the process and it's all good, so anyway. So let's get started on the main image, and I will set up in the lounge, I think, so I've got more space around me. as it's a little bit cluttered in here, as you can see. I've stupidly turned my studio into more of a toy shop than a fully functioning art environment. Okay, so I've just been very carefully trying to get a basic profile of the face. I'm using a very light pencil, it's a 2H, and all I'm trying to do here is just lightly get the composition mapped out, and then when that's a bit more solid, I'll start doing the shading on the face. I'm going to spend a lot of time on the face because I want to get that right. And once I've got the basics down with that, I know how heavy I can go with the darker areas and all the details of the snakes and things like that. So when I'm etching out a basic composition, I like to sometimes stick a piece of paper to a wall, and that way I can see it from directly above, and I find I can step back and get a much better sense of balance and scale, as opposed to me sitting at a table looking at things from a distorted angle. I'll sometimes even tape a piece of paper to a board so I can do this at my easel, but for filming reasons this is easier at the moment. I actually quite liked the minimalist look of the face I had going on here. So I'm just kind of solidifying maybe the eyelashes and a few other little areas. Doing this just helps me sort of map out where I'm going with things. I don't want to use an eraser on this because I always find when I do that I get terrible smudges. So hopefully I won't have to do that. I'm going to give a sort of like black flowing locks in between all the snakes. So the idea is to have some ornate kind of, not so much of a crown, but just like a headdress type thing, but I'll have the snakes intertwined with it. I want the face to be tight and shaded and looking right, and the hands, snake wise, I want to just sort of maybe focus on a handful of them and then have the rest sort of hinted at. I don't want to be drawing hundreds of thousands of scales because that will just take up too much time and drive me slowly mad. I'll just film in various intervals here while I'm getting the basics down. So at this stage I've probably spent a couple of hours on it now, and I'm pretty happy with the balance of things and the way it's looking, so yeah, I feel a bit more confident now going in with softer pencils and things like that. Okay, apologies about the lighting, but the composition's kind of looking quite solid now. I'm currently just working on whereabouts the snakes are going to be going. I'm basically just like drawing some squiggly lines and then kind of interweaving the snakes. This glove is being really handy, so I haven't had any paper smudge yet. Also, I like the idea of some robes sort of cascading off her shoulder, swirling up that way. Her wings are going to be going up this way, and then I want to have like some robes swooping that way. So I'm doing my best to try and keep a very swirling, fluid flow to the composition. So I'm just going to keep chipping away at these basics when I can start with the shading. I find I very much like to work in layers when I draw or paint, starting very light and adding darker shadows to areas slowly, so I constantly feel like I'm enhancing what I see before me. Female faces like this as well need to have that softness, I think, so I'll make sure I blunt a very, very hard pencil like a 2H, and what I'll do here is like try and pivot the side of my palm gently so I can sort of shade at a consistent pressure. And that way I can bring up the softer pencils and build up the shadows and the shades gradually. Okay, so here I'm using a very light grey pro marker. Basically just going over all the pencil I've just done, but I'm essentially giving her almost a skin tone. So I was feeling a little bit experimental here and started experimenting with a little bit of charcoal for some reason. It didn't really work, and yeah, it looks more like she's got a bit of a stubble. So it's looking pretty messy at the moment and blotchy. So what I want to do now, as I'm still very much in the experimental stages, is bring a bit of gouache into the mix. So I've got a little bit of white here. I just went into the art shop and bought some black. So what I'm going to do here is just play around and just see what happens. So what I'm thinking is to kind of have a mix of paint and pencil in a few key areas like the hands, the face, and maybe a couple of the snakes, and the rest to be very loose and rough pencils, and kind of interplay the two mediums, and hopefully it will create quite a nice effect. The gouache has a bit more of a creamy kind of look to it, to the colour of the paper, so this might look quite mucky. But you know, I don't mind taking some risks at this stage. I think it's exciting when you don't quite know the outcome of things, and hopefully this will work, and if it doesn't, I'll find another way of making it work. So I've just mixed up a little bit of white gouache, and I'm going to be applying it very lightly here. I find every piece I do has a process of its own, and every technique I know will have to adapt to work on a new image. So at this stage I feel like I'm finding my stride with a newly introduced medium, and then it all starts feeling natural again. So basically starting light again with the whites and a few light greys, and then I'll see what needs to be done with the darker tones and things like that. And here I'm using a very cheap soft brush to fill in some like larger areas, and I find gouache is mixable in a way I find different to acrylic. Like you can beat it about more and force it to blend smoothly, but cheap brushes have hair issues though, as you can see here. Hairs. It's really good. So I've added a few darker greys around the eyes here, and I'm just re-picking out different highlights. Little white sort of sparkles and things around an eye can really bring an eye to life. So much emotion can be captured just by a little white dot in a certain area. It can change the expression of an eye, make things look happy, sad. It's amazing what you can do with just a few tiny little touches. So now I feel I've got the tonal values down for her face. I can start going in and detailing and fleshing out different areas with a pencil, quite confidently now as well. And I've lightly hinted at some scales on her forehead and cheek, just to sort of give her more that serpent look. And I've also made her eye a bit more pale as well, so it looks more sort of haunting and, I don't know, more sinister, I guess. So I went a little bit further down with the gouache last night. I've got it to a point where I can kind of see where I'm going with it, but what I want to do now is, as I move away from these sort of areas, I want to have things getting a little bit looser, and to do that I need to set a bit of like an underbase or a colour tone down. And last night I spilt my coffee, as you can see all along here. It went on the paper as well, a few splashes here and there. It doesn't matter, because what I'm going to do now is actually go crazy with some coffee and get some sort of staining textures going on here. And I think the sort of warm, muddy colours of the coffee will actually complement the sort of monochrome grey tones I'm going to have going throughout the image. And I think the two together should look quite nice. Battery's about to die. But I've got a circular shape going on here, and what I wouldn't mind doing is actually having some gold in here, which I'll do towards the end. This is last night's coffee. Decaf, actually. A couple of sponges here, which I'll use to sort of splash on the coffee. Hopefully they'll give some nice sort of textural effects. Got a brush as well and some water, because I might need to wet the paper first. I'm hoping the paper isn't going to bubble up too much, because that would suck. Also got a little bit of brown calligraphy ink here as well, just in case the coffee isn't doing what I want it to do. I'm going to set the camera up, let's get going, hope for the best. So frustrating just as I'm about to film, I run out of storage space. Anyway, where was I? Here goes. I'm an absolutely massive coffee addict. I've been drinking coffee all my life, so it's nice to find another reason to drink it, I guess. And who knows, maybe I could call it a tax deductible now, as it's been used in some artwork. So we'll see what the tax man has to say about that in January. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is wet the paper, and it's going to bring in a little bit of grey. This is where the paper's probably going to warp like crazy, but we'll see. Grey gouache, and hopefully the paint will just do its own thing and create a cool effect. Oh, that's interesting. That's very interesting. So what I'm doing here is just adding in some little white areas. The yellow is a bit mucky, to be honest, but I'm just trying to create an effect more than anything. So I don't mind a few little dark areas like that creeping in at the corners. It adds to that look I'm after. Up here. With a sponge I want to keep rotating it so I don't end up getting that look of a repeat pattern. And also the plus side of doing this is I can be a bit more messy and get away with it. And if the paper creases or I have issues like that further down the line, it just adds to the overall effect. So it takes away a lot of risk. Okay, here's a quick look at how that came out. You see where the coffee's sort of done its own thing when it was mixed with the water, and it's kind of dried in these nice, kind of like little map patterns in a sense. What I also did as well, just quickly off camera, was when it was a little bit more dry, I went across with some water and then just flicked a toothbrush over the top, and that's created some nice little effects as well. So the floorboards are creaking like crazy here. So yeah, unfortunately I've lost a lot of my underdrawing, so I've got to try and get my head around that again. But yeah, kind of happy with how it's looking. I think it's going to help the overall image. So now the coffee's dried and I've got that overall background tone down, I can go in with some black pens and fine liners and start making things look a little bit more vivid. And I'm just quickly getting those hand basics back down again now after I lost them with all the messy layerings and things like that. I'm not going for realism in this piece at all, and instead I want it to have a more stylistic look. So things like the hair I'm almost giving an anime style, with the solid, swirly kind of flow to things. I'm really liking how the coffee's done its own thing in the way that it's dried, and it's got these nice ripples and fluctuations and textures going through it. I'm going to say textures an awful lot in this video, I'm sorry, but I'm a bit of a texture freak when it comes to stuff like this. I just feel it really sort of adds so much character, and it just makes a piece more satisfying to me when I can see and feel, and it just feels more real and organic. I'll probably be saying that word a lot too as well. Oh god. I almost feel like when you add little details like jewellery and clothing to characters, you can really sort of make them your own and breathe life into them and give them personality and stuff like that. So it's something I always enjoy doing. So now I'm working on the hand and the arm area. I'm not going to bother with pencils on this section. I'm just going to go straight in with a few layers of pro markers and then straight in with a gouache and repeat the sort of process I did on the face really. So I'm trying to work quite fast here while the paint is wet so I can get some nice soft shading and smooth blending going on. So just a couple of white highlights here with a brush. I tend to jump around a lot from area to area. This is a subconscious thing I only really notice that I do when I look back at footage. I think I work with quite a lot of energy and it feels like it's always bursting, so my hand's just leaping from area to area, but in a weird way I find things start to come together quite quickly that way, as everything's kind of been worked on at once, it almost feels like. Now the gouache has a slightly rough matte texture to it, so pencil crayons can work quite nicely on the top of it. So what I'm doing here, I'm just adding some highlights and shadows here with a few Prismacolor pencils, just black and white ones at the moment. And also pro markers work quite nice over the pencil crayons, as you might have seen in my previous Venom artwork video. I find I can almost blend the pencil crayons even more with a pro marker on top, and it creates a bit more of a vivid look to things. So I find I just love to mix mediums. It feels very natural to me, and I feel each medium has its own sort of strength and weakness, and I find mixing things up tends to bring out the best in everything, I feel. So I'm just doing a few little details here to a bracelet with a very fine point pen. And what I tend to do here is maybe just work on the bracelet till it's about 70% done, and then I'll move on to another area, and then I'll come back and rework the bracelet in conjunction to fit it in with the other areas I've done, and just sort of fine-tune things with a fresh eye. Okay, so last night before I went to bed, I gave the image a bit of a spray with some fixative, only in a few key areas. And what I find that does is, especially where the gouache is concerned, it makes it a far more, compliant surface for the fine liners to go over. When you use pens like this to go over the gouache, it literally just dries the nib up in seconds and it will just ruin your pens. So I find a little bit of fixative just helps make the surface a bit more manageable for these kinds of things. I always find when I wake up in the morning with a fresh eye, it's nice just to have a little bit of a tinker with a certain area, just to get the sort of juices warmed up, and then I'll launch into a whole new section. But yeah, just using this extra small Faber-Castell pen now just to pick out a few different scales. And what I can do is just add a little bit of a shadow or a line underneath certain scales, and this will give the illusion of sort of depth. At the moment I just want to get the basics down, and then I can start picking out highlights and maybe adding some tonal values just to create a sense of dynamics and get things to pop a little bit. So what I want to do up in this area is just refine some of the swirling fabrics and the feathers and the snakes with some pencil, but keep it very loose and sketchy. And I think there'll be a nice contrast then as the sort of artwork goes down to the more tighter, more complete looking areas down here. I think her sort of bodice type thing she's wearing, I'll do that in pencil as well, and maybe just a few bits of pro marquee here. So what I might do now is just add a bit more coffee stain in these corners. So I'll just stain this quickly, let that dry, and then I can get to work on these areas. So now I'm just like penciling in some of the folds and creases on the robes. But I'm going to be getting to work on her bodice. And here I'll just be instinctive and scribble out some shapes and patterns, and then I'll shape them when I layer them up with the pens and the paints. I'm going for simple flowing swirls and patterns. And flowing hair and robes and clothing and stuff like that can be really handy in a sense that you can use that to your advantage to fix composition issues if you have any. You can bring balance to areas of the picture. A swirl here or there can really help balance an image and make things look and sit pretty. Going to go in now with a 7B and tidy up some of the lines, strengthen some of the shapes and things like that. So I'm using a much darker pencil here. I think it's a 7B, and I'm just tightening up some of the lines and getting things looking a little bit more slicker. So a couple of pro markers will be used here just to fill in some of the areas of the hair and just add a bit more sort of separation to things. So it's a lovely new morning and the sun was beaming from my windows, so I thought I'd film this little bit here for no good reason really. So I'm just tweaking a few areas with some fine liners here. And then going back in with the pencils to add some shading and texture. I do recommend, if you're going over pencils, especially soft ones like this with pro markers, just add a little bit of fixative perhaps, and that will help any unnecessary smudging. So these little white highlights I'm doing here, I'm using a pen I often use, which is a Uniball Signo white gel pen, and these are very inexpensive and great for adding little white details quickly. Alright, it's time to start tackling these dreaded snakes. So I'm getting the basics down here with a pencil, then I'll enhance everything a little later with some pro markers for some colour tones, and fine liners then to strengthen details like the scales and things like that. So here I'm just using the stone plate section of a Lazy Susan. Don't know why, there's something about that name that's always cracked me up, but anyway. I'm just outlining the moon again here. I've put a little bit of paper underneath it just to protect the face as well, as the stone slate here is very heavy. So I made myself a coffee and I'm literally just going to zone out for a long time now and just lose myself in snake scales. I'm not worrying too much about perfection here. I just want to get the basic essence down and just shape things as I go. It's weirdly satisfying watching this in the time lapse. If I was really going to invest my time and get the snake scales looking perfect, I'd probably be spending at least a week on a piece like this. I've just discovered, I guess, a little bit of a hack for drawing snake scales. So it'll be easier for me to show you on a separate sheet here. So say now this is the body of your snake. If you go like that, so you do two either side and one in the middle. Then you get that nice, pleasing to the eye layered effect. I also decided to give the snakes white eyes, as I think it's got a bit more of a haunting look, and have them sort of looking in one direction like Medusa's spotted someone approaching, perhaps a heroic warrior or something, I don't know. Good morning. So we are at a stage now where I can kind of see light at the end of the tunnel. The majority of the snakes are done, to a basic level at least. Yeah, I'd call them all 80% done, because once the image is pretty much done to this standard all over, then I can see exactly where I want to go into the finishing touches with little highlights on the scales. Still got this area up here to do, which is going to be pretty much pencils. And then I've got something special planned for the moon, or the sun, or whether it's going to be behind her. So I'll just show you what I've got planned. So this just turned up in the post, so let's have a quick look at what we've got here. Pure gold. So shiny. It's a lot smaller than I expected. Apparently it's 24 karat. So while I've been working on this piece, I thought with this moon section here, it might be nice to actually bring in some golds. And I was thinking about painting it in solid acrylic, but I thought that could look a little bit, I don't know, a bit gloopy and nasty. So something I thought about doing was, oh wow, I've never used this stuff before. Wow, don't stick to me. So what I have here, oh God, it's so light. Jeez, gosh. God, it feels light as a feather. So this is 24 karat gold leaf, which sounds expensive, but it actually was like I don't know, under $2 for this pack of 10 sheets. I think it's 10. What I'm thinking of doing, it's quite a nice colour actually, it suits. I'm like, oh God, okay, this isn't working. Oh no. Right, I'm going to put it back in here until I know how to handle this stuff. I would never normally use gold in a painting, as I think it can look a bit gimmicky and a bit tacky. But with this style of image, and the fact it's real gold and not like just sloppy acrylic paint, I think it might actually add something nice to it. And, you know, from a stylistic standpoint, I think it will look quite cool. We'll get to this stage a little bit later though, so stay tuned. I absolutely love working in natural light sources, and luckily the house I live in's got a lovely brightness to it. I'd hate to live in a dark house. I have in the past, and I find it very, what's the word, counterproductive for me when I'm working. It makes me, it's almost depressing in a sense when you're not in a well-lit home. And most artists probably can relate to this, that you're always screwing up your body clock. It's very easy to miss the mornings, and you know, when you do get it back on track, you get stuck into a project, and before you know it, you slip straight back into nocturnal mode. But it's the life of an artist, I think. Okay, so I've just done a little bit of work up in this corner, just getting a few basics of some of the feathers in and stuff like that. So I've done some rough shading on the robe. I want to kind of keep it to pencils here. I don't want to get too heavy with like the pen and the ink, as it will, I think it will start to swamp the image a little bit. And I quite like the idea of it going to more of a rough sort of sketchy pencil look. I think it's quite effective. So I'm basically going to stop for a little bit and return to all these areas and the rest of her when I have worked out what I'm going to do with this area here. So what I need to do first, I think, is do a mask of her face. Definitely don't want to use masking fluid. So if I can basically just draw around this area here on some paper and have a nice tight mask, which means I can have some relative freedom when it comes to applying the gold leaf and whatever base colour I'm going to put down here, I think that'll be time well spent. Okay, we're about to get into what I can only describe as risky territory. I'm not too sure what is going to happen next, but I'm going to just be spontaneous and I'll just work with things as it happens. I might be using the mask in this stage, I'm not too sure just yet, but what I've got here is the remains of a tube of hard as nails, which is like a solvent-free high-power adhesive, so it's kind of like a rubbery plaster is the only way I can describe it. I've used this on the underbase of another recent painting to add some textures. I'm not too sure whether this video is going to be uploaded before or after that one, so if you're seeing this one now, then you're about to see me use this stuff for the first time. I'm going to smear this onto here like so. Obviously I've got to be very careful around her face because that could be a bit disastrous if I go in too close to it. See, I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but there's some nice little things going on here. A lot of this is out of my control and I've just got to adapt to how this stuff comes off the palette knife here. And I think once it's all painted over and brought together with one specific colour, it should create a nice effect. So what I'm going to do here is come off the mask. Do the same here on the hand. That seems to have worked. What I'll do is just soften it around the chin, as I don't want it to distort the face. There should be a little bit of paper warping here, but hopefully nothing too major. Well, that's nice. I'll leave some textures quite thick around the edges here. I'm going to try here. It's just a little bit in some of the corners as well. Or maybe up here. Creates a cool effect. Oh, that's interesting. It's almost like a living sea. It's got an almost translucent effect to it if you spread it thin enough. It's quite cool. I might try drying this with a hairdryer as well, so just speed up the drying process a little bit, as I want to get onto some colour washes and see where this idea is going tonight. I'd find it very hard to go to bed and sleep leaving this to dry overnight, because at this stage I don't know whether this is a good idea or a bad one. So, I'd rather go to bed with a milestone hit and potentially some peace of mind. Not going to be too precious. I can go back over certain areas as long as I avoid the face because of the gouache paint. I think I'll leave it at that for the time being. I might do some more of this towards the end when I can see where things are at. Yeah, as you can see, there's quite a lot of texture going on there. Okay, so I've just gone over that with a hairdryer, and you can see it's left quite a nice effect in certain areas. You see the textures popping through there. When it's spread thin like that, it doesn't, swallow up the textures underneath. It's almost translucent, but it just gives a little bit of an effect. So there's quite a lot of experimentation going on here, but so far it's not too bad. This sucks, so I've got to paint over this, but I think redoing this will be easier than trying to paint within all the little gaps and things like that, so not to worry. Oh my word, bring that to the camera. Show it to the camera. I think she's a keeper.
That's gross.
Okay, so the white has pretty much dried. There's a few areas obviously I've got to touch up and strengthen the outlines here and there, go back over the hair and things like that. But I thought as I was painting on the white that it would be easier for me to paint over the hair rather than try and paint all between all the little details of the hair. I'd rather just redraw it over the top. So I picked this up the other day. Now this is acrylic ink and the colour is shimmering gold. Now I'm not sure if the camera can pick this up too well, but if you look, it's almost like a pearlescent kind of colour. If it doesn't work, then I will think what to do next. Maybe I'll just change the colour here altogether. But I don't know, hopefully the gold leaf will look quite nice with this, and this will hopefully be subtle enough to fill in the area and not overpower things too much. It's very light and subtle. You can just about see it there. Looks a bit better in person, but the way this is going on, I can almost just do a wash over this, and yeah, I think it would definitely give a nice subtle effect. That's very interesting. You can just about see it catching the light there. This one looks pretty cool, so I'm going to go over this whole thing, and then we will potentially bring this into a few other areas as well. So I'm actually really liking how subtle the gold is here. The light just catches it from certain angles, and from some angles you can't even see it. So I'll probably be using this gold in a few future pieces, as it's got a very nice subtlety to it. What I'd love to do is look into bringing gold into my art prints as well. So maybe I could look into doing some hand-finished gold prints or something like that. Oh, this is the disaster bit. Okay, now with the gold leaf, I didn't really know what to expect. I've never used gold leaf before. I had a vision in my head of what I thought it could have been, but when I applied it, I quickly realised that it's just not going to look right, and it's just too much. So what I decided to do was just add a small coating of the shimmering gold on top of the gold leaf, just to see if it would tone down the effect that the gold leaf had. This didn't really work too well, so I decided to just add a few more layers on top and essentially paint over the gold, with the idea that maybe it would shine through in certain areas and maybe leave a cool effect, but it didn't, and I ended up painting over the entire area of gold leaf, which I left to dry, and then I went to bed. Well, this is kind of weird. What we have here seems to be like that. Is it oxidization or something that happens to metal? But yeah, the gold has gone green. But funnily enough, the more I look at it, the more I quite like it. So what I'm going to do next is go over this with the shimmering gold I used originally, and hopefully that will just sort of tone down the green and kind of leave me with a nice subtle effect. This might end up being a happy accident. We shall see. I'm going to stay in my dressing gown for a little while. I can't be bothered to get dressed just yet. Oh, stool. You can still see some of the green coming through, but I kind of quite like that. But I'm not going to worry too much about that sort of stuff until I've refined these areas, redrawn the hair there, strengthened the hand, maybe worked on the outlines of the moon. I'll be able to address whether that's an issue or not. I do actually quite like it. I think it just adds an extra, what's the word? Element of interest, I guess. From a lot of angles, it just looks like a dirty white paint, but you know, when you move around, then the light catches it and you can see it's gold. So it's nice and subtle. Anyway, I think I'm going to get some white gouache paint out now and start experimenting with some highlights and details in various areas, and then I'll address this issue here if it actually is an issue. I actually quite like it. I'm just tidying up little areas, adding highlights with a small brush. I'm using acrylic here, and I like to mix white acrylic sometimes with white acrylic ink, as I find it gives a nice smooth consistency to the paint, and I just find it nicer to apply. What I'm going to do next is a little bit risky and not really ideal. So what I'll do is go in with some matte varnish, just spray in a few key areas, maybe around here at the top, the snakes, and then when that dries, it will give me a rough texture which I can use to my advantage when it comes to the pencil crayons. White pencil crayon in particular just won't work over this sort of finish that the image has at the moment. So I'll give this a quick spray now, and while that's drying I'll run into town and do a few errands, and then I can come back and hopefully finish this thing off. So this isn't something I would recommend too much, but I want to have that textured surface so I can really get the sort of effect I want with the pencil crayons. So what I'm going to do here is quickly spray in a few areas. I've sprayed this varnish on a painting before and it actually was disastrous because it really dulled the paints down. But on this, it should be okay. Ugh, the fumes. Right, I'll let that dry. So I'm just redoing this area now with some Art Nouveau style hair. I'm just using a black fine liner here. So it's going over the paint nicely, but it could smudge very easily. So I'll make sure it dries and I'll give it a blast of fixative just to protect it. Hey guys, I'm currently recovering from a bit of a heavy weekend. I had my friend Noel down. He's an amazing artist who I'll be doing a collaborative video with in the near future. So I was looking at this with a drunken eye and I decided I would go over that sort of green effect that the gold leaf had left behind. And now I'm going to go over it with some white acrylic to sort of bring it back up to the look it originally had, and then I'll go back over it with the gold shimmering acrylic ink. Then I'll just be doing little I'm so tired. Then I'll be doing textures and touch-ups and things like that, and then it should be pretty much done today. So you can see here I had a gouache. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Just kind of covered the problem, and hopefully now this will start looking better. I was doing some tweaking on some of the snakes last night as well. Not too much has really gone on behind the camera. I've got this habit of starting paintings, getting about 3/4 of the way through and then stalling and then starting something new, but yeah, I'm very excited about this one. It's probably one of the biggest paintings I might have ever done. So what I'm doing here is just adding a few layers of white acrylic here, and then that gold acrylic ink I used earlier will have a nice surface to be applied to. Then I decided to bring that hard as nails adhesive back in again, and what I'm doing here is just adding a little bit to some of the corners, and I find when it's thinly spread it's almost semi-translucent, and it gives a nice effect. And I find it sort of helps counterbalance the heavy textures in the moon by giving the entire piece a more overall textural look. So a couple more textural splats and washes, and another pointless arty sun shot for you guys. Alright, and we are down to the finishing touches. So if you look here, gold has worked quite nicely. Been quite busy working with snake scales, just picking details out and things like that, and tidying things up. Bad people out on the streets tonight. I just popped in to see a company in town that have an A3 scanner, so I could potentially get this scanned in today if I finish it, and that would be great because I kind of want to get the prints of this made and ready ASAP. So I'm going to be very busy for the next couple of hours, and hopefully I can get this scanned in today, and then in the evening I can prep the file ready for print and get this in my online store ASAP. And just to finish off, just a couple of small white touch-ups here and there. I always feel like a piece is never finished, but when I hit that sort of happy 90% done milestone, a sort of wave of release washes over me, and especially when there's a deadline looming, I'm happy to sort of sit back and say, job done, time to move on to something else. And here's a photo of the finished piece, which I posted on my Instagram just before I got the image scanned in. And we are done. A few ups and downs, but we got there in the end, and I'm quite happy with the results. So I'm going to run into town now, get this scanned in, and then we can round up the video with a nice high-res look at the final piece. So I've had a couple of days delay editing this video, and in the meantime I have been to my printers and picked up the prints, so I will show those to you now quickly. Just realised that panda's on the table I was going to show these to you on, so I will take this into the lounge. Yeah, these turned out absolutely awesome, so a big thank you to my wonderful printers who are called Hello Blue, and they are based in Bristol. Really great guys, and they always do an amazing job with my prints. So yeah, these are A2 in size. They look absolutely lovely. All the details are present. When you're an artist and you do prints, it's a godsend when you find some printers who do your work justice and who you can rely on in terms of quality and things like that. It's my Boba Fett one there as well. Plus we got Soma print. There's quite a few Medusa ones here. And a huge thank you to everyone who's ordered the Medusa prints so far. I put them in my store the other day, and so far it's been a popular one, so I'm really thankful. So I'll be doing my print prep tomorrow and getting these out on the way to my lovely customers, so thank you very much. Also, if you are interested in picking up some prints on my online store, I do ship with worldwide shipping and I sign every print. But if you think of ordering some prints in time for Christmas, please get the orders in ASAP so I can post them out and they stand a good chance of getting to you in time. And I think that's the end of the video. You gonna join me for the outro? Andy. You want to be on camera? Your time to shine. Your moment of fame. No? Oh, you little... And that's another video wrapped up. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please give a video a thumbs up if you can, as that really helps the channel. And subscribe if you haven't done so already. And I hope you will join me in the next video, which is going to be an unboxing video, but an unboxing video with a twist, because I'll be unboxing artwork which has been sent to me from the clients who commissioned me to do the artwork I am unboxing. So I'll be basically showing you stuff in concept stage and then the final product, which I'll be opening and seeing for myself the very first time. I've got things which I've had for almost 2 years which I haven't unboxed because I've been waiting to make a video. So stay tuned for that, take care, and I'll see you in the next video, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already.